Ik is David Sishola, een visserman voor 32 jaar wat onder destijds die apartheid regime het my pa gewerk by vir 'n blanke regshouer. My pa was die besitting van daardie blanke man. Hulle het die quotas besit. Met die gevolg was hulle was gebeheer en gemanipuleer. Hulle het besluit wanneer word daar wanneer hoeveel geld moet my pa hulle pay, wanneer moet my pa hulle pay. Dat so hektiek geraak ek moes die skool verlaat op 'n stadium. So ek moes saam met my pa see toe gaan. Daar ek het nie 'n ander keuse gehad nie. Vanaf 17-jarige ouderdom het ek begin werk op die see en vir 32 jaar 'n volbloed visserman is. Het ek nog nie een keer in my lewe 'n reg besit nie.
Artisanal fishing is a way of life for around 50 million people worldwide. These fishers catch 50% of the global catch, contributing to the food security of their local communities. However, they are some of the most marginalised communities, often with no access to formal fishing rights. In 1994, as South Africa headed for a democratic future, fisheries was an industry earmarked for transformation. Communities hoped that finally the wrongs of the past would be addressed.
You know, post-1994, there was a great expectation amongst fishing communities that their rights would be restored and that basically people would have access once again to resources, especially those immediately adjacent to where they lived. And of course, this didn't materialize as expected.
Legislation in 1997, the Marine Living Resources Act, well, that's the new piece of legislation that a democratic South Africa adopted. That legislation recognized commercial fishing, recreational fishing, and subsistence fishing as the only forms of fishing that can legally exist. Great. So the legislation says apply for subsistence permit. You get a subsistence permit. You can only fish so many fish and you must eat it. You're not allowed to sell it. So all that 50 snook that you catch that day, you have to eat. You can't sell it to buy milk or bread or pay for school fees. It's illegal. And if you're found selling it, you get taken to jail. You get criminalized. You become a bandit.
Uhulumende wethu omnyama usenza imfene. Thina akafuni abahlala apha nje basenzile. Angasibamba ukuze basifunela ntoni apha. Sizohlukumezwa ulwandle.
There were a number of events, and I think one of them in particular was the World Summit on Sustainable Development, where Masifundisi was instrumental in getting a number of small-scale fishers in the country together, and where they then interacted with other small-scale fishers from around the world and began realizing that these fisher rights were their rights to be had. And so that, I think, was quite an important event in sort of moving fishers and building a sort of fisher social movement. Then working together with the Legal Resources Centre, who have played a critically important role in this whole process.
So the original court case from 2005, which is known as Kenneth George, that case was based on the fact that the new regime of marine resource regulation in South Africa under the Constitution, that in fact had an exclusionary effect on small-scale fishing communities. And the argument was that for a number of reasons, even though the new legislation provided for commercial, recreational and subsistence fishers, those three categories, none of them corresponded with the needs of small-scale fishing communities for different reasons. One important reason is that small-scale fishing communities traditionally fish as communities, and so the entire individual permitting system was problematic.
create a collective voice of fishing communities that's been disenfranchised. And the important thing here is fishing communities, not fishers, because that's what the legislation did. It separated out a fisher from a net maker, from a net fixer, from a boat builder, and from a person that's selling the fish or cleaning the fish. It did not look at fishing as a system, as an overall process.
Order was reached by agreement that the minister would, with a technical task team, develop a policy that would ensure the realization of the socio-economic rights of small-scale fishers.
So different cultures, different contexts and ecosystems have different ways of harvesting and have different techniques and produces different levels of economic viability. How do we get these communities to understand what their differences are and identify what the similarities of those differences are?
South Africa is a diverse country with a multitude of languages and cultures. It is also geographically diverse. This impacts fishing practices. On the arid western seaboard, the cold Benguela current drives nutrient-rich waters along the coast. This upwelling is responsible for the abundance of life here, yet also results in an environment that can be cold and hostile. Here, much of the fishing is boat-based, chasing high-value species such as crayfish. On the eastern coast, the diversity of species is greater, yet abundance lower. Lack of suitable harbours, coupled with treacherous conditions, means that most fishing is shore and estuary-based.
So we didn't build an organization for the sake of building an organization. We built the organization by having a series of meetings and team building sessions and workshops to discuss what must go into policy. And we had that countrywide. Different communities, different moments. And it was totally organic. It came from here.
The delays in implementing policy resulted in many representatives arguing for a stopgap measure. Interim relief, as it came to be known, was implemented in 2007. This granted fishers an exceptional individual quota to land and sell catch. Now, in its 9th year, many argue that it has been corrupted to the extent it represents more of a hindrance to communities than a help.
I think for me, I feel very good. This is a policy that was written in conjunction with fishing communities, with the participation of fishing communities, with the inputs of fishers themselves, with the input of fisherwomen, the youth, you know. That's the most brilliant part to understand. And I feel part of it. And for that reason, I'm very much excited for it to become a reality. Yeah.
We thought a year or two, of policy development and then it'll be there. We didn't expect it was going to take. Now 7, 8 years down the line, we're still not sitting with policy.
These delays have caused frustration and suffering amongst fishing communities. Yet it is important to acknowledge that this process is without parallel in the world. It is only thanks to democratic South Africa's constitution and judiciary that the legal challenge was possible.
Seriously focus on what we should do as communities to gear ourselves for the policy to be implemented. And one of the key pillars of what the policy will ask us to be ready for as a fishing community is unity. So we should constantly work on that issue of unity.
Where South African government went wrong was it changed politically from apartheid to non-racialism, but the nature of the economy stayed intact. In fact, the structure of the economy was consolidated by adopting WTO regulations, by entrenching World Bank policy. That is where this neoliberalism we have is particularly evil. You know, it's one thing having a system where concrete manufactured commodities is privately owned. But once nature and natural resources are, that has basically placed our entire earth at the mercy of the global entrepreneur.
I'm still afraid that the small-scale fishing policy will be controlled by big business. I'm still afraid of that end.
The challenges to implement are still great, yet the obstacles surmounted, impressive.
When we were busy developing this policy, we were at the same time working with the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization to say to them, you also have to develop an international set of guidelines that will return and enable the natural resource used by the small-scale fishing sector to the small-scale fishing sector. Recognize the human rights, and through recognizing the basic human rights to a livelihood, they will develop themselves.